Hey guys, tonight, we're trading the comfort of familiar pillow creases for the red-hot dust and ancient hush of Timbuktu's city gate, a place where the air itself is thick with stories, and every grain of sand has witnessed a secret or two. You stand maybe half awake squinting into the wavy horizon where the day's last gold is fading from the dunes. The old stone arch ahead seems to shimmer with possibility, or maybe that's just the heat playing tricks on your sleepy mind. Either way, you're here now in the twilight, where travelers used to gather clutching battered satchels and minds brimming with rumors of knowledge lost and found. A battered wooden sign creaks above you. The lettering is half gone, erased by centuries of wind in the hands of 1,000 hopeful scholars. This is the place. You step forward, your sandals stirring up little puffs of dust, the city's red sand sticking to your toes just like it has for centuries of merchants, dreamers, and book lovers before you. The walls are warm even as the sun sets, holding on to the day's heat, like an old librarian clutching a favorite scroll. That dry mineral tang is everywhere. Maybe you cough a little, blaming it on allergies, but you know it's really the sense that you've crossed a threshold, and who knows if you'll survive what's beyond it. Some say Timbuktu's lost libraries are just a myth, the kind of thing travel influencers and eccentric professors hype up for a few more clicks or citations. Historians still argue whether the city was ever truly the Paris of the Sands, or just a clever marketing scheme with extra camels and sand in your tea. But here you are, and even skeptics would have to admit there's something about the hush at this gate that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. In the distance, the call to prayer drifts across the rooftops, mingling with the distant braying of donkeys, and somewhere a child laughing. It's a symphony of daily life unchanged for centuries, but you can't help but wonder how many lost words are buried beneath your feet. You check your phone because of course you brought it. But signal is basically a rumor here. No Instagram filters, no quick Google to double-check your trivia. You're forced to rely on your senses, your memory, and the faint hope that maybe you'll stumble on a forgotten manuscript before you trip over a stray goat. As the sky darkens to velvet, the stars blink awake, reminding you that this was once a city of astronomers who mapped the heavens long before telescopes or GPS. Mainstream historians say some of the oldest star charts and medical treatises in Africa were written here, but locals claim even stranger tales. Magic spells scrawled in the margins, guides to summoning rain, and yes, recipes for crocodile dung sunscreen. Spoiler: dermatologists do not recommend. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And because it's always fun to see how far our bedtime caravan reaches, post your location and local time in the comments. Are you a midnight dreamer or a lunchtime napper? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past the city gate, feeling the crunch of sand and history under your feet. In the growing dusk, you realize you're not just entering a city, you're stepping into a maze of memory. Some say the true treasures of Timbuktu aren't gold or salt, but words whispered through centuries, tucked away in dark corners and dusty drawers, just waiting for you to turn the next page. You leave the gate behind and find yourself swept into the pulse of Timbuktu's marketplace, a slow-motion carnival where every sense is nudged awake. The scent of sun-baked dates, sour camel milk, and 100 kinds of spice swirl in the air, clinging to your skin. You shuffle along, eyes half closed with drowsy curiosity, while merchants call out deals that sound suspiciously generous for such a legendary crossroads. There's a woman selling bundles of brittle scrolls alongside onions and millet. She winks as you pass, as if she knows you're here for more than groceries. Everywhere the city hums with half-heard stories. Griots, those musical historians with memories like elephants and showmanship to match, perch atop woven mats, spinning tales about Timbuktu's golden age. One pauses his tune to wave you over his fingers, dancing across a battered kora. You want real treasure, he whispers, grinning. It's not buried. It's dusty and smells like goats, but it'll change your life. You listen as he describes scholars who could recite entire books from memory, and children who practiced calligraphy in the sand, erasing and rewriting as the desert wind dictated their lessons. Mainstream history books agree Timbuktu was once a magnet for the world's best minds. In the 15th and 16th centuries, they say the city's libraries held tens of thousands of manuscripts from astronomy to law to medical wisdom that might make your average medieval European faint with jealousy. But the griots slip in details. No textbook mentions the day a donkey wandered through the university and ate a stack of mathematics treatises, or the time a runaway student hid a priceless astronomy scroll under a pile of fish. Historians still argue whether such stories are exaggerations or clever parables, but here they're as real as the dust on your feet. You wander past a row of leather workers and pause to watch a pair of teenagers squabbling over a battered book. It's missing its cover, and the pages are more whole than parchment, but they treat it like gold. One insists it's a love poem. The other claims it's a recipe for an unbeatable camel stew. You almost offer to settle the debate, but the language, some swirling centuries-old script, might as well be an alien tongue. Still, the squabble is gentle, more ritual than fight, and you smile at the way knowledge is still bartered and cherished here, long after the original authors' names have faded into rumor. The marketplace never truly empties even at night. Shadows stretch as the sun slips behind mud brick walls, and you catch glimpses of tiny secrets. A young girl hunched over a slate, tracing the same verse over and over with the tip of her finger. An old man selling what he claims is the last surviving page of a treatise on flying carpets, wrapped in a bit of yellowed cloth. A bored cat dozing atop a heap of cast-off manuscripts. You begin to notice that not all the books on offer are real. Some are cleverly disguised bricks, or empty shells meant to fool thieves or nosy officials. As you edge deeper, a merchant stops you offering what looks like a recipe scroll for desert-proof pancakes. He leans in, stage whispering, "Don't trust everything you read in Timbuktu." Sometimes the real secrets hide in plain sight. Mainstream historians believe most of the library's treasures have been scattered or lost, but there are always rumors, hidden caches beneath the floorboards, secret family collections, a chest buried behind the mosque with a lock nobody dares open. You move on, letting the market's slow swirl carry you toward the city's quieter lanes. The sky above is deepening to indigo, and you realize with a sleepy grin that you've spent most of your evening eavesdropping on legends. Whether or not every tale is true, you can't help but feel you're close to something extraordinary. Maybe not gold or gems, but the kind of wisdom you only find when you let yourself get lost. The market's clamor fades as you shuffle down a narrow alley painted with shadow. There, sitting on a battered wooden stool, you spot the city's gatekeeper, the sort of official whose job is mainly to sigh at people. He's wrapped in a weathered indigo robe that matches the sky at dusk, his sandals patched in at least 3 places, his beard dusted with flour from a lunch long gone. He looks up at you with the particular resignation of a man who's had far too many lost scholar types wander through on quests for forbidden knowledge and left only footprints and disappointment behind. You try to offer a polite greeting, but the gatekeeper waves you on his sigh so heavy it's practically a physical object. Another one, he mutters barely loud enough for you to hear. "You'll want the libraries." They all do. His tone is dry but not unkind. He's seen your type before, dreamers, researchers, insomniacs with a penchant for mysterious places and ancient secrets. "Just keep your expectations reasonable," he adds. "Some people come searching for gold, some for wisdom. Most leave with a sunburn and a new appreciation for bottled water." You pause to take it all in: the cracked plaster on the walls, the faded murals of camels and caravans, the sign above the gate that's almost been erased by the sand. The gatekeeper gestures behind him, where a stray goat is eyeing a basket of apricots, with the same scholarly interest you probably wore on your face a few minutes ago. "See that goat?" he asks, arching an eyebrow. "Knows more about lost treasures than half the tourists who pass through." You both share a quick laugh. At least someone in this city gets to nibble on a prize once in a while. There's a mainstream historical fact here. For centuries, Timbuktu's guardians, be they gatekeepers, scholars, or ordinary townsfolk, quietly protected their libraries from raiders, colonizers, and even the desert itself. The libraries were rarely just grand buildings. More often, they were hidden in private homes, locked in trunks tucked in behind shops, or, as the stories go, disguised as loaves of bread, or sealed in clay jars. The sheer scale of what's been preserved and what's been lost still boggles the modern mind. But historians still argue whether the image of Timbuktu as a lost city of gold and books is more legend than reality, more fable than fact. The truth, as ever, is sandy and complicated. A pair of children run past, trailing laughter and a cloud of dust. The gatekeeper calls out to them, switching effortlessly between languages: Arabic, Songhai, Tamashek, and French, all of which echo through the city's labyrinthine lanes. You wonder how many tongues have spoken here, how many scripts have traced prayers or shopping lists onto brittle pages. The gatekeeper squints at you again. "If you're serious," he says, lowering his voice, "there's an old man by the well who knows every alley and every locked door." Or so he claims. But beware, he also claims to have taught Ibn Battuta how to ride a camel backwards. The last part comes with a sly wink. You suspect everyone in Timbuktu is at least a part-time comedian. As you thank him and move on, he leans back, settling in for another long night at his post. The desert wind sighs with him, carrying a pinch of dust and the faint scent of cumin. It's a gentle reminder you may be on a grand quest, but you're not the first, and you certainly won't be the last to fall under Timbuktu's spell. Maybe the real secret isn't the lost books or gold at all. Maybe it's the city's sly sense of humor, its ability to outlast, outwit, and occasionally outsnark the rest of the world. You glance back as you turn the corner, catching one last glimpse of the gatekeeper and his watchful goat. The city seems to breathe around you, ancient and alive, waiting for you to take the next step. You square your shoulders, dust off your sleeves, and walk on, certain that the true treasures, whatever they are, won't reveal themselves to the impatient or the overly serious. Luckily, you're neither, and there's plenty of night left. You round a bend and nearly collide with an old man hunched over a crooked staff, tracing slow patterns in the sand with its tip. He glances up, eyes twinkling behind a web of sun-etched wrinkles, and gestures for you to crouch beside him. Without a word, he resumes his task, scraping out what appears to be a map in the red dust, a winding maze of alleys, wells, and most importantly, hidden doors. You settle in, realizing this is one of those classic bedtime history moments. The mysterious local, the cryptic map, and you, the half-confused, half-delighted explorer. All you're missing is a dramatic musical score. As he sketches, you start to recognize a few landmarks from your earlier wanderings. The bustling market, the tired gatekeeper, the goat, of course. But he adds in places you haven't seen yet. Small boxy symbols for library manuscript cache, and, intriguingly, excellent tea. You try to memorize the layout, but the sand slips and shifts under the old man's staff, blurring the edges of knowledge as if the city itself is determined to keep some secrets just out of reach. He finally speaks, his voice as soft as the evening wind. Most people look for treasure in gold or jewels. In Timbuktu, treasure is brittle, brown, and easily sneezed upon. He grins, revealing a single gold tooth, a tiny relic of the trade that once connected this desert city to distant empires. Remember, the true map to Timbuktu's wisdom is always changing. Today's library might be tomorrow's bakery. Or, he says, lowering his voice, it might just disappear in a sandstorm. You nod, suppressing a sneeze, and notice he's added a question mark to one library location. Apparently, even the locals aren't sure about everything. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Timbuktu's mapmakers were famous for their elaborate, often intentionally misleading charts. Maps from the Middle Ages show Timbuktu larger than Paris, with golden towers and rivers that never existed. Historians still argue whether these fanciful maps were meant to attract scholars, confuse invaders, or simply amuse bored cartographers. Maybe it's all three. The old man's map includes more than just geography. He's drawn a palm tree labeled gossip, a crescent moon marked good luck, and a squiggle you're pretty sure means beware of cranky librarians. He taps one spot. Here. This library is older than memory, but only opens when the wind blows from the east. Or maybe it just hasn't been swept in a while. You both chuckle, and he offers you a tiny round nut bitter, but said to boost memory. He claims it helped him memorize the entire Quran and his wife's birthday, but only the former with much accuracy. A group of children rush by, one clutching what looks like an ancient half-eaten book. The old man shakes his head, mumbling, "The future of scholarship, hungry and sticky-fingered." He stands with surprising agility and hands you his staff for a moment. You pretend you're a great explorer, but the staff is mostly good for poking at mysterious lumps in the sand, which turn out to be just more sand. The old man cackles. "You're ready. Or at least as ready as anyone gets in this place." As you rise, you glance back at the sand map, already half scattered by the evening breeze. It's a reminder that knowledge here is never fixed, always shifting, always elusive, always just a little bit out of reach. But the search, you realize, is half the fun. Besides, even the best maps in Timbuktu come with at least one built-in detour, and a complimentary sense of directionless wonder. With a smile and a nod, you thank the old man. He simply shrugs, muttering something about finding the next cup of tea. As you turn to follow the freshly imagined map, you hear his parting words carried by the wind. "If you get lost, ask the goats. They know more than they let on." You pocket a small stone from the sand, your own secret souvenir, proof that you were here, and at least try to understand the mysteries. After all, in Timbuktu, even getting lost is a kind of progress. You follow the map's wobbly memory trail toward a quieter quarter of the city, leaving behind the last shouts of the marketplace and the lingering laughter of children. The alleys here are narrow, flanked by mud brick walls that curve like they're still settling in after centuries of sun and wind. You slow your pace as you reach a low archway, the entrance to a courtyard. The air shifts. Here the world feels muffled sound, absorbed by thick adobe footsteps, silenced by ancient dust. Stepping inside, you're hit with a smell that's impossible to forget, even if you wish you could. Part musty parchment, part goatskin, and a generous swirl of desert air. This is the scent of old books, one part mystery, one part sneeze. It seeps into your clothes, your hair, your very dreams. You pause, letting your eyes adjust to the dappled shadows cast by a ragged awning overhead. Manuscripts lie everywhere, stacked on tables, bundled in corners, and peeking out from under piles of cracked pottery. Some look almost new, their leather covers only gently battered. Others seem so ancient you half expect them to crumble if you breathe too hard. A skinny cat winds its way between your legs, tail up, then disappears beneath a pile of scrolls with the practiced stealth of someone who's been evading bedtime for centuries. You almost trip over a faded carpet and, looking down, notice it's embroidered with geometric patterns and what just might be verses of poetry, or possibly the world's most elaborate to-do list. Historians still debate whether these decorative carpets were status symbols, practical insulation, or secret study guides for nervous scholars during exam season. In a far corner, you spot a woman wearing an indigo robe, her hair streaked with desert gray, delicately dusting a stack of manuscripts with an ostrich feather. She hums quietly, a tune that sounds like a lullaby mixed with a warning. She looks up and gives you a look that every librarian in history has perfected, half welcome, half warning. "If you break it, you buy it," she says deadpan, before adding, "and you can't afford these." There's a mainstream historical fact buried here. In the golden age of Timbuktu, families passed treasured books down through generations, often wrapping them in layers of cloth and leather to protect them from the desert's relentless appetite. Some manuscripts have survived 5 or 6 centuries, surviving warfare, flood, and perhaps most impressively, hundreds of years' worth of bored teenagers doodling in the margins. You move deeper into the courtyard, brushing past ferns that somehow cling to life despite the arid air. A soft giggle draws your attention to a pair of children hunched over a battered tome. They glance up, eyes bright with mischief. Want to see the funniest picture? One whispers, flipping to a page where a camel appears to be wearing a judge's wig. It's proof that even ancient scholars weren't above a little comic relief. The courtyard itself feels like a living memory. Every tile, every crack in the wall, every battered chair tells a story. Historians still argue whether some of these buildings were always libraries, or if, as the old man hinted, they simply transformed when the need arose. A kitchen today, a reading room tomorrow, a hiding place for wisdom when trouble was near. In a city like this, even the architecture is designed to confuse would-be thieves and occasionally over-eager researchers. You spot a tiny alcove stuffed with loose parchment and a single clay lamp. You squeeze in, feeling the cool wall against your back, and breathe in. This is the moment every bedtime adventurer hopes for, the sense that you've slipped into the hidden heart of history. Here, surrounded by the quiet buzz of dust motes and old paper, you realize that treasures aren't always golden or gleaming. Sometimes they're just pages waiting patiently for someone curious enough or sleepy enough to care. A breeze rustles the palm leaves above, and somewhere the cat yowls as if to say, "No more history tonight." But you're not done, not by a long shot. You've only just started to explore the secrets these dusty treasures hold. You pause at the threshold between sun and shadow, absorbing the scene that unfolds before you. In the shade of the courtyard, a circle of scholars, their indigo robes deep as midnight, gather on faded mats. Their sandals rest neatly at the edge, as if even their feet respect the gravity of centuries' worth of arguments. You hover at the margin unnoticed for a moment, listening to the hum of voices, as lively as a family reunion with far too many strong opinions, and no dessert in sight. One scholar, beard perfectly combed, and turban slightly askew, waves an ink-stained hand as he launches into a heated debate about the proper way to calculate the phases of the moon. His neighbor, a stern woman with a sheaf of law codes tucked under her arm, interrupts, insisting that mathematics should never be left to astronomers, who can't even balance their own budgets. A third scholar, clearly in favor of breakfast over celestial mechanics, pleads the virtues of millet porridge, while the youngest of the group struggles not to giggle at a doodle hidden under her palm. Mainstream historians tell us that Timbuktu was a magnet for scholars from across the Islamic world, Europe, and even far-off Asia, all drawn by its reputation for deep learning. And let's be honest, the rumor that someone here once discovered the secret to camel-proof bookbindings. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the city's universities like Sankore and Jinguereber rivaled the libraries of Cairo, Baghdad, and Cordoba. Some manuscripts were so valuable, they were traded for their weight in gold. Others, for a decent cup of tea and a good joke. The arguments continue. Now the group is splitting hairs over the origin of a particular star chart. Was it copied from a wandering Berber astronomer, or did it come by way of a lost Andalusian shipwreck? Historians still argue whether these libraries were truly the Alexandria of Africa, or whether that's just the world's oldest example of clever branding. The reality: these scholars probably cared less about how outsiders saw them, and more about who'd taken the last piece of parchment and whether it could be recycled for shopping lists. A sleepy student sidles up to you, cradling a mug of spiced coffee. He leans in conspiratorially and whispers, "The real debates happen after midnight." That's when they argue about breakfast etiquette. Who knew millet porridge could be so controversial? You're tempted to ask for details, but the group's laughter rises again as someone recounts the time a manuscript about astronomy was ruined, when a hungry goat decided the margins looked delicious. You try not to laugh out loud. After all, manuscript preservation is serious business, even if hungry goats sometimes disagree. The scholars notice you then, and a woman waves you into their circle. She asks, "What do you seek? Knowledge of the stars, or the recipe for the world's worst stew?" You admit that you're here for a bit of both. The group exchanges glances and the atmosphere softens. You're no longer an outsider. You're just another insomniac hoping to pick up a stray fact or two. As the conversation swirls around you, you marvel at the way wisdom is treated here. Not locked away, but argued over, laughed about and shared freely, though not without a bit of friendly one-upmanship. You notice the scholars are writing as they talk, scribbling notes in the margins of battered books, doodling tiny camels or cartoonish moons, recording both insights and insults for future generations to puzzle over. Eventually, the debate drifts from star charts to spiced porridge, and then seamlessly to the best methods for outwitting the city's legendary librarian, who rumor has it can smell an overdue scroll from a block away. You realize you could spend a lifetime in this courtyard, swept up in the warm, endless river of conversation, and never hear the same story twice. For tonight, though, you're content just to listen, and maybe jot down a few good breakfast tips in your mental notebook. You peel yourself away from the circle of scholars, curiosity tugging you deeper into the warren of mud brick corridors. The soft shuffle of your feet is soon replaced by the almost soundless hush of a world built for secrets, a library not just of books, but of silence itself. You duck through a low doorway, blinking as your eyes adjust to the dimness. The walls here are thick, built to hold in a little coolness, and perhaps to keep the city's greatest treasures hidden from more than just the heat. Inside, it's even dustier than you'd imagined. Each step kicks up tiny clouds, making you feel as though you're walking through time itself, or maybe just a particularly persistent allergy attack. A single lantern flickers in the corner, illuminating row upon row of shelves, not all of them straight. You have to stoop to avoid a ceiling beam, and even then your head just grazes the rough plaster, shaking loose another tiny drift of centuries-old dust. You sneeze softly, and somewhere in the gloom, a mouse scurries away, as if it knows you're not here for him. This is one of Timbuktu's fabled mud brick libraries. Unlike the soaring marble palaces you might picture, these are humble, nearly camouflaged, and more fortress than museum. Mainstream historians note that these libraries, often attached to private homes, preserved thousands of manuscripts through the centuries, sometimes by sheer luck, sometimes through cunning, and sometimes, you suspect, through the protective power of a well-placed broomstick and a stern look from a grandmother. Historians still argue whether the legendary Lost Library was ever one place, or just a patchwork of private stashes scattered throughout the city's winding alleys. You take in the details: shelves sagging under the weight of paper, and parchment bundles of goatskin pages tied with faded ribbons, a cracked window through which the desert peeks in just to see if there are any secrets it's missed. You spot a pile of manuscripts so tall and crooked that you wonder if somewhere in the stacks there's a forgotten mathematician's formula for keeping things upright. If so, the current librarian clearly never found it. A pair of glasses perches on a desk that's so covered in open scrolls, it looks like a bird's nest built entirely out of homework. Behind it sits a man with an ink-stained thumb, muttering to himself in 3 languages, as he compares 2 identical-looking pages with the intensity of a detective solving a mystery. He doesn't look up as you approach, but gestures absently to a battered chair beside him. You take the hint and sit careful not to knock anything over. In Timbuktu, even sitting down feels like an archaeological dig. You try to read the nearest manuscript, but the script is so curly and elaborate, it looks more like a drawing than a set of words. You can make out a date, maybe 1432, and a faded diagram of the stars. You wonder aloud if this was someone's homework assignment, or maybe a half-forgotten love letter disguised as astronomy. The scribe chuckles, finally looking up, and confides that in Timbuktu, every great discovery started with a messy desk and a little daydreaming. He says it with such warmth that you suspect it's one of those truths that never quite makes it into the textbooks. A mainstream fact slides quietly into the moment. Many of these manuscripts contain not just science and theology, but poetry. Riddles, jokes, and marginal doodles, proof that even the wisest minds needed a laugh now and then. Historians still debate whether some of the city's most famous treatises were ever intended to be so serious, or if they started out as elaborate pranks between rival scholars. It would certainly explain the treatise on how to train a camel to recite algebra. You linger a while longer, breathing in the dust, the stories, and the steady beat of history preserved sometimes by nothing more than a stubborn will to remember. If you're lucky, you might even spot a librarian sneaking a nap behind a tower of dictionaries. After all, everyone here deserves a little rest, even the keepers of lost wisdom. You lean forward, squinting at the desk, where a calligrapher bends over his work tongue, poking from the corner of his mouth with the focus of a master, and the slight mischief of someone who might draw a mustache on a sultan if given half a chance. His robe is spattered with ink hands, stained a dozen shades from black to indigo, and his fingers work with a speed that's hypnotic even in the flicker of lamplight. He glances up, catches you watching, and grins, revealing a smudge on his nose that's almost certainly permanent. With a quick flourish, he finishes a line of delicate Arabic script, then blows gently on the wet ink. You catch a faint whiff of something sharp, perhaps the telltale tang of gallnut, or the faint sweetness of acacia gum, both staples of medieval Saharan ink. The calligrapher nudges a finished folio your way. Go ahead. Touch the page, he says, but don't sneeze. You comply, fingertips tingling as you run them over the raised lines. It feels almost alive, words with a pulse pressed into paper so soft and worn. It's a miracle they haven't just dissolved in the breeze. Mainstream history tells us that Timbuktu's scribes were famous for their skill and speed, sometimes producing hundreds of pages in a single season. Calligraphy wasn't just an art form here. It was a practical tool, a sign of status, and at times, the only thing standing between a family and financial ruin. Manuscripts were copied, recopied, and loaned out for hefty deposits more precious than jewelry, in a city where the written word could travel farther than any caravan. Historians still argue whether the city's scribes maintained such dizzying output out of true love for learning, or if they were simply desperate to beat rival copyists and avoid the wrath of picky librarians. You ask the calligrapher how he manages to keep the letters so steady. Practice patience, and a strong cup of coffee, he jokes. And never let your cat into the ink pot. He shows you a half-finished page where the margin sports not just neat script, but also a tiny, expertly inked donkey wearing a scholar's hat. We add these for luck, he says, and sometimes to annoy the scholars who have to translate them. He winks, tapping his pen against his nose. The real wisdom in these books is knowing which jokes not to explain. He gestures to a low shelf stacked with test sheets filled with loops, flourishes, and experimental letters. Some are so beautiful they could hang in a palace. Others, well, even geniuses have off days. A stray breeze flutters a sheet to the floor, and as you stoop to pick it up, you find the back is covered in mathematical formulas, alongside what looks suspiciously like a recipe for spicy lentil stew. This sort of double-duty manuscript, the calligrapher confides, was standard practice. Waste not, want not. Plus, you never know when you'll need dinner ideas at midnight. You watch as he dips his pen, the lamp throwing gold across his page. For a moment, everything else falls away. The world narrows to ink parchment and the slow, rhythmic scratching of pen on page. It's a soothing lull broken only by the occasional grumble as he flicks away a piece of dust or wipes a splatter off his wrist. You realize that in this city, even the act of writing is woven with patience, humor, and a sly sense of competition. A gentle cough from the doorway draws your attention, a young boy with ink on his fingers, bearing a tray of dates and coffee, clearly here to fuel the master's midnight labors. The calligrapher sighs in gratitude and invites you to stay a while, share a story, or even try your hand at a letter or two. You make a valiant attempt. Your aleph looks more like a worm than a letter, earning you both a good-natured laugh and a gentle correction. Historians still puzzle over just how many scribes toiled in Timbuktu's heyday, or what percentage of surviving manuscripts are copies of copies of copies. You suspect the truth, as always, is tangled with myth and memory. But for tonight it hardly matters. Here in the quiet light, you're part of the unbroken chain, one ink-stained page at a time. You thank the calligrapher, your fingertips tingling from the brush with history, and step back into the shifting light of the courtyard. The breeze carries new smells, now spices and dust, but also something metallic and sweet. You remember the old maps drawn in sand, the secret doors marked only in memory. With a full moon rising, the city's famous crossroads seem to hum with secrets, as if every shadow hides a story waiting to be told. The next alley opens into a storeroom piled high with goods, rough blocks of salt, small bags of gold dust, and stacks of parchment wrapped tightly in goatskin. A merchant with a sun-browned face and an easy smile waves you over. Looking for treasure, he asks, half serious, half teasing. You want gold, you want salt, you want paper. He laughs. Here everything moves except the books. They only move when someone's really desperate or really wise. It's a mainstream fact that Timbuktu was the heart of a vast trading network that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Niger River. Gold, salt, ivory, even ostrich feathers traveled through these markets, but manuscripts, brittle, hand-copied, sometimes only barely legible, were often more valuable than any physical riches. Historians still argue whether the city's wealth was built more on books than on gold, but in this storeroom the lines between the two blur. A single manuscript copied from an Andalusian original could be worth a camel load of salt. A rare treatise on medicine might fetch a price only kings could pay. The merchant slides you a small scroll tied with twine. This one tells how to cure headaches, he says. Also, how to dye wool purple, and how to survive a dinner with your mother-in-law. You nearly drop it in surprise when you unroll a page and find a detailed drawing of a sheep with what appears to be a very elaborate hairdo. We have many specialties in Timbuktu, he says, grinning. Some more useful than others. You wander through the piles, fingers grazing rough gold flakes and the smooth, waxy texture of salt. A group of traders argue quietly in a corner, their words drifting to you. I tell you, the real treasure was in that last shipment. Did you see the margins? Full of recipes. Another retorts. No. The best find was that bundle of riddles. Made the whole caravan laugh for 3 days. Even here, surrounded by the trappings of worldly wealth, it's the words and stories that spark the brightest debates. A stray cat rubs against your ankle, then leaps atop a pile of parchment, scattering salt crystals across the floor. The merchant sighs. She thinks she owns the place. Maybe she does, she's read more than I have. You laugh with him, picturing the cat as a secret librarian, and pocket a single grain of salt as a tiny memento, a reminder that in Timbuktu, everything is connected by trade, memory, and a touch of mischief. Historians still debate whether these storerooms ever really held the city's most precious books, or if the best manuscripts were always hidden away in private homes far from prying eyes. But as you watch the light spill across piles of gold and ink-stained pages, you realize that here, value isn't just measured by weight or rarity. It's measured by the stories people are willing to carry across deserts, risking sandstorms, sunburn, and the occasional grumpy camel. You thank the merchant and slip back into the night, feeling the weight of a city built on barter. Barter built on trust, and trust woven through every book, every grain of salt, every laugh in the dark. Your steps carry you onward, still searching for the next secret, half hoping it's wrapped in parchment, half hoping it's just another good story to tell when you finally drift off to sleep. You wander through a crooked hallway into a dim, cool chamber walls, thick enough to block out the midday heat and half the city's gossip. Here, the only sound is your own breathing, and the faint flutter of pages being turned somewhere just out of sight. Shelves line every wall, each packed with manuscripts, some bundled tight with faded ribbons, others leaning like tired elders huddled for warmth. It smells of dust ink and the kind of wisdom that only grows when left alone for centuries. You spot a battered table, its surface pockmarked from 1,000 writing sessions. On it lies a stack of books, each open to a different page, and each page crowded with more than just careful script. There are doodles everywhere, swirling vines, fat-bellied fish, abstract squiggles, even a tiny caricature of a scholar snoring on a book. You smile. Ancient students clearly weren't so different from modern ones, prone to daydreaming and creative annotation during long lessons. Mainstream historians agree the margins of Timbuktu's manuscripts are a goldmine of accidental history. Some notes are deadly serious corrections, comments, questions for future readers. Others are decidedly not. You see jokes about grumpy teachers, recipes for dubious herbal cures, and even a note to feed the goats before attempting algebra. The margins become a story within a story, a secret dialogue spanning generations. It's the medieval version of a group chat, only with more sand and fewer emojis. As you peer closer, you find a recurring symbol, a little star always drawn in the same shaky hand. Next to it, a line reads, "Don't trust this recipe." Amin burned the bread again. You imagine Amin face-smudged, swearing off baking forever. In another book, someone's written, "Tell Mama I'm studying," followed by what looks suspiciously like a sketch of two boys racing donkeys outside the mosque. The more you look, the more you realize how alive these pages are, not just because of what was written, but because of what was whispered, giggled, and erased. You try to copy one of the intricate patterns, your fingers smudging the edge of the page. The dust tickles your nose and you sneeze loud enough you fear to wake any ghostly librarians. You half expect to be scolded, but instead a gentle voice from behind says, "Careful." Some of those notes are older than the walls. You turn to find an elderly woman, eyes sharp behind a pair of cracked spectacles. She gives you a conspiratorial smile. The best secrets are always in the margins. Historians still argue whether those doodles are hidden codes or just evidence that boredom is timeless. She shows you her favorite, a page filled with tiny perfect script, but interrupted by what appears to be a dancing chicken complete with a tiny hat. "That's my uncle's work," she says, beaming. "He claimed it helped him remember the order of the caliphs." You're not sure if she's joking, but the joy in her voice makes you want to believe it's true. She invites you to sit, and together you flip through more pages, swapping your favorite discoveries. You point out a peculiar recipe for spiced sandcakes, which she assures you is a joke unless you're especially desperate for dessert. The two of you laugh quietly, the sound muffled by thick walls and thicker history. You spend a while lost in these margins, feeling the centuries collapse around you, not as a burden, but as a comfortable blanket of shared humanity. In this city of scholars, it's clear that wisdom and whimsy are rarely far apart, and sometimes the silliest note is the one that survives. You leave the chamber, nose still tingling with dust and laughter, and step into a narrow hallway that smells sharply of leather sweat and sun-baked clay. As you follow your nose, you hear the distant rumble of voices punctuated by the low, tired groans of camels. You emerge into a wide, sunlit space at the edge of the city, Timbuktu's legendary caravan quarter. Here the stories of knowledge don't just live in books, but ride into town on 4 knobby knees and 2 impressive humps. Rows of camels laden with bundles wrapped in patchwork cloth kneel in the sand, snorting and flicking their tails at the relentless flies. Traders stride between them, their voices rising and falling in a mix of Arabic tamashek and Songhai. You're drawn to the scent of something odd, sweaty, but somehow comforting, like an old library with extra legs. You realize it's the unmistakable perfume of camel, mingled with hints of cinnamon and distant rain. Mainstream historians love to tell the tale of Timbuktu's trans-Saharan trade routes networks that linked Morocco and Egypt to West Africa, bringing not just gold and salt, but rare books, scientific ideas, and occasionally scandalous poetry. It wasn't just scholars and kings who thirsted for manuscripts. Camel drivers, guards, cooks, and apprentices all played their part in safeguarding these treasures across hostile terrain. Some journeys took months, braving bandits' dust storms and heat so fierce it could melt the wax on a sealed scroll. You wander among the animals, brushing sand from your clothes and marveling at how the city's lifeblood always arrived with a side of animal drama. A young handler waves you over, beaming as he shows you a trunk lashed to his camel's saddle. Inside, carefully wrapped in goatskin, are a handful of battered manuscripts, titles inked in elegant Arabic, edges chewed and worn. For the library, he explains, and for the teacher's stories at night. You spot a few non-book items too: a wooden spoon, a dried fig, a tiny reed flute, and what looks suspiciously like a hand-drawn comic about the camel who wanted to read. He tells you a legend one passed around campfires for centuries about a caravan that braved the desert just to deliver a single forbidden scroll, outrunning a sandstorm and an entire band of book thieves. Historians still argue whether such tales are fact or the result of too many sleepless nights on the dunes. What's certain is that Timbuktu's libraries would be far emptier, and its stories far fewer, without these relentless, often grumpy, four-legged couriers. The boy offers you a chance to pat his favorite camel. You do, and the animal blinks at you, unimpressed but tolerant. He assures you with the confidence of an expert that camels are smarter than most professors, and certainly better at carrying books, though they sometimes eat the evidence. As you walk away, a trader calls out, "Careful. If you read near a camel, it'll expect a bedtime story." You linger, watching the slow choreography of unloading and reloading the city's fortunes, literally carried on backs and humps. In Timbuktu, the scent of camel sweat is as much a part of history as the ink in the oldest manuscripts. You realize as the sun begins to set that in this place, learning and travel, scholarship and sweat have always gone hand in hand, and occasionally hoof. You leave the caravan behind, grateful for their service to knowledge, and maybe just a little more respectful of the animals who carried wisdom across the sand, one plodding step at a time. With the memory of camels and their unlikely contributions still fresh, you make your way to another quiet room tucked deep within the city's maze. Here the walls are thick, the windows small, and the light slants in golden from above, catching on the edge of a stack of manuscripts, arranged with loving care. A hush hangs here, a hush so complete that you instinctively lower your voice, as if afraid to wake the ghosts of ancient scholars. You kneel before a bundle wrapped in faded silk, and a librarian, her fingers as delicate as a surgeon's, unwraps the cloth with reverence. Inside, a manuscript written not in the familiar flowing Arabic script, but in Latin and Old Spanish. The ink is faded, the edges nibbled by time, but a single word leaps out: Cordoba. You blink, tracing the lines with a gentle touch. The parchment is surprisingly supple for its age, and as you breathe in, you detect the faintest aroma of olive oil, centuries-old ink, and the ghost of someone's perfume. Mainstream historians mark this as a golden era of global knowledge exchange. Books traveled incredible distances, sometimes arriving in Timbuktu after journeys of years. Treatises from Andalusia, medical texts from Egypt, and philosophical works from Persia all found their way here, copied, translated, and debated under these very roofs. Some manuscripts survived fires in distant libraries, only to be read aloud beneath a Saharan moon. Historians still argue whether the famed Andalusian connection was as vast as legend claims, or if a few lucky finds grew into stories larger than life. A young scholar sits cross-legged nearby, lips moving as she reads softly from the Spanish parchment, translating as she goes. She pauses to explain a curious phrase, a bit of medieval kitchen wisdom about storing lemons in salt. She laughs, confessing that her grandmother still does this just in case a recipe from 500 years ago ever returns to fashion. You swap stories about family food quirks, discovering that both your families have a talent for misplacing the most important recipe just when you need it. You spot a different kind of marginalia on these European pages. Prayers for safe travel scribbled in Latin. A scrawled warning against borrowing this book without permission. Serious curses apply. And a miniature sketch of a knight chasing what can only be described as a runaway loaf of bread. The past, you realize, is never as solemn as textbooks suggest. The librarian brings out a small palm-sized book, its cover cracked, but its purpose still clear, a medical guide written in 3 languages. Inside, herbal cures for fevers and chills of the desert night, alongside a cheerful recipe for a clove and honey syrup that's guaranteed to improve the memory of forgetful scholars. You chuckle, remembering your own lapses, and the librarian winks, saying, "We keep a batch on hand for exam season." As the room fills with the golden haze of late afternoon, you reflect on how knowledge flows in unexpected ways, by caravan and chance, by translation, and by accident, by families and friendships that span continents and centuries. You carefully close the Spanish parchment and thank the librarian, feeling honored to be part of a chain of readers stretching back to a time when books were the rarest treasures of all. You leave the library with a head full of forgotten languages and a gentle reminder. Wisdom travels not just in pages but in laughter, recipes, and the smallest of shared traditions. Night thickens as you move through winding lanes, the stars bright above casting silver patterns on the mud brick walls. You slip into a reading room where candles flicker in glass cups, their flames reflected in 1,000 shards of time-worn glass. Around a battered wooden table, a handful of scholars gather, some young, some old, all united by their love of stories that outlast the night. You take a seat, the chair creaking in sleepy protest, and glance at the manuscripts strewn across the table. One scholar, peering over half-moon spectacles, is deep in debate with her neighbor about whether reading after midnight is a scholarly necessity or a guaranteed recipe for bad dreams. Another, a wiry man with perpetually ink-stained sleeves, insists that the mind is sharpest at midnight, though his slurred words and slow blinks suggest he's losing that particular argument. Mainstream historians will tell you that Timbuktu's scholars often gathered late into the night, trading ideas. In the soft glow of lamps, their discussions ranging from astronomy to law, philosophy to medicine. These reading rooms, neither grand nor imposing, were the real heart of the city's intellectual life. Historians still argue whether these gatherings inspired revolutionary new knowledge, or whether they were mostly excuses for gossip and the sharing of outlandish dreams. You lean in as an elder begins a story, a tale about a mysterious visitor who brought a map to the stars on a night much like this one. Some said it was a chart for navigation, he intones. Others said it was a bedtime story for the lonely. The group laughs, but the youngest among them, eyes wide and curious, asks if the chart ever led anyone home. The elder's smile is sad and wise at once. Every map leads somewhere. Sometimes all the way to sunrise. Someone offers you a mug of thick sweet tea, a local specialty laced with mint and a touch of sleep-inducing herbs. As you sip, you glance over at a parchment illuminated by candlelight. Its ink is brown and curling, but the words seem to shimmer. You realize you're looking at an ancient debate record, lines marked by different hands, as if the arguments themselves were too important to risk forgetting. A scribbled note in the margin reads, "Remember to ask about the goat," causing the group to burst out laughing again. Apparently, every reading session has its own legendary mascot. A few scholars pull out battered cushions and settle in, feet tucked beneath them, as the conversation drifts from fierce debate to gentle storytelling. Someone recites a poem about the stars, another hums a lullaby, and a third sleepily wonders if reading under candlelight really will give you bad dreams, or if that's just a rumor started by librarians desperate for a quiet night. You find yourself lulled by the rhythm of their voices, the clink of mugs, and the soft sigh of the wind at the window. Here wisdom and wonder flow together unhurried, undemanding a river of memory and hope winding gently through the room. You realize that whatever the answer to the midnight reading debate, this moment of shared quiet is its own kind of treasure. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sleepy warmth of the room seep in, knowing that the world outside can wait until the next sunrise. For now, you're exactly where you need to be, surrounded by books, laughter, and the promise of dreams as old as the city itself. You stir from your reverie as the conversation in the reading room takes a somber turn. The scholars recount stories of disaster times when Timbuktu's greatest treasures were nearly lost to hungry insects, unpredictable floods, and the sudden merciless flare of fire. You picture yourself standing at the edge of history, watching flames lick the edges of a manuscript, or termites quietly devour centuries of wisdom, leaving only a fine bitter dust. One elder holds up a page, its edge nibbled into lacework by worms and sighs. Every generation fights its own tiny battles, she says, voice steady but sad. Sometimes with swords, sometimes with brooms. She points out faded water stains, marks left by one especially unlucky rainy season, and a series of scorched corners where a quick-thinking scribe managed to beat out a fire with his own robe, though the robe, she notes with a chuckle, never looked the same again. Mainstream historians record the relentless threats that endangered Timbuktu's manuscripts: the climate, the insects, the periodic flooding of the Niger River, and, of course, human error. Fires, whether started by accident, lightning, or conflict, were especially feared as they could wipe out generations of learning in a single smoky night. Yet what survives is a testament not just to luck, but to the ingenuity and stubbornness of countless caretakers. Historians still argue whether it was divine providence or simply community vigilance that saved so many texts. You listen as another scholar tells of a legendary rescue, a sandstorm blowing in at dusk so thick and furious, it threatened to blast open every window and fill every archive with grit. The townspeople, he says, formed a human chain, passing manuscripts from hand to hand from the leaky library roof all the way to the shelter of a merchant's cellar. The story may be embellished, but its truth lives in the pride and gratitude in his voice. Your own hands twitch imagining the weight of a soggy, worm-nibbled book. The group jokes that the city's chief pest control officer is the cat you met earlier, who's personally responsible for at least one heroic rescue per week. Someone else claims that the most effective anti-fire tool in town is a tea kettle. After all, it's always nearby, and pouring hot water on a fire is at least good for dramatic storytelling, if nothing else. As the laughter dies down, a hush falls over the room. The oldest among them, a woman whose hands tremble as she pours tea, says softly, "Every book you touched tonight survived more dangers than you or I ever will." You feel a quiet awe settle in your chest, a deep appreciation for every splotch, wrinkle, and faded line. In this city, survival is its own kind of heroism. You help the scholars snuff the last candles, each flame bowing out with a final wisp of smoke. Outside, the moon is high, the streets empty, but for the soft pad of the night cat's paws. You walk home through the winding alleys, every footstep echoing with the memory of books almost lost but never quite forgotten. You rise early the next day, the sky outside barely blushing with the promise of dawn. As you wander the silent city, the shadows are long, and the alleys empty, except for the occasional rooster announcing his unappreciated opinion. Today's mission, it turns out, is not reading, but eavesdropping on a different kind of story rivalry. The city may be famous for its treasures, but you soon learn it's equally famous for the not-so-gentle competitions that spring up between its keepers of knowledge. You slip through an alley where a pair of librarians trade whispered barbs as they sweep dust from their doorsteps. One claims her library boasts the oldest treatise on medicinal plants. The other, not to be outdone, retorts that her manuscripts contain the only known recipe for desert-proof pudding. It's all in good humor mostly. The stories you overhear could fill a book themselves. Late-night pranks involving fake bookworms, clandestine attempts to borrow the prized astronomy scroll, and most scandalous of all, the infamous library switcheroo, in which a prized text was mysteriously replaced with a collection of bad poetry. Mainstream historians acknowledge that scholarly rivalry was a constant undercurrent in Timbuktu's heyday. With so many private libraries and learned families, competition sometimes got fierce. Manuscripts went missing. Scholars engaged in public debates that occasionally devolved into gentle insult fests. And at least one legendary feud ended with both parties writing entire treatises about the other's extreme lack of camel etiquette. Historians still argue whether these stories are exaggerated for entertainment or rooted in real scholarly drama. You pass a bakery where the flour-dusted owner claims her shelves hide more secrets than the libraries do, and she winks, sliding you a fresh roll with a page of poetry baked inside. You make a mental note not to eat your research, no matter how good it smells. There are rumors of a night when rival librarians staged a race through the city, the winner earning the right to display a coveted map for 1 month. The losers, so the story goes, had to recite embarrassing poetry at sunrise while wearing mismatched sandals. You chuckle as you spot a young boy racing down the lane clutching a battered book to his chest, pursued by a girl brandishing a feather duster and a string of threats in 3 languages. Rivalry, you realize, isn't limited to the scholars. Even the youngest in Timbuktu know the stakes of a good story and the pride that comes with protecting a secret. At the corner, you overhear a pair of old men boasting about which of them once smuggled the true recipe for sandcakes from a rival's shelf, only to discover it was just a cleverly disguised shopping list. By late morning, the alleys are busier, but the playful banter never stops. You realize that for all their talk of lost wisdom and dusty treasures, the people of Timbuktu thrive on this never-ending contest of wits, memory, and quick feet. The rivalry keeps knowledge alive, pulsing with energy like a pot of tea forever bubbling over the fire. You find yourself grinning as you walk back toward your lodgings, feeling the city's heartbeat in every whispered insult, every swapped recipe, every borrowed manuscript. In a place where history and humor are always intertwined, you know the only thing more valuable than the lost libraries is the ongoing, very human story of those determined to outdo one another, one clever dusty prank at a time. You duck into a narrow lane lined with shuttered windows, the city already shimmering with heat, and follow the scent of something unexpectedly spicy. Word spreads quickly when an old recipe scroll surfaces, and today a small crowd is gathering around a tiny sun-bleached doorway. Inside, you're greeted by the chaos and aroma of what can only be described as Timbuktu's most ambitious kitchen experiment. A wiry man with ink-stained hands stands at the center waving a fragile parchment. Behold, he announces, grinning at the assembly. The lost recipes, scroll, spices, stews, and more miracle cures than you can shake a goat at. The crowd laughs, but you spot genuine excitement in their eyes. He unrolls the scroll carefully, revealing a jumble of faded script, kitchen stains, and a few questionable doodles. Was that chicken supposed to have 3 legs, or is it a camel in disguise? You listen as he recites a recipe for Sultan's sunrise stew, a concoction promising to restore energy to the weary and courage to the faint. The ingredients include honey millet, dried dates, a pinch of saffron, and curiously, a whisper of desert wind. The crowd debates whether this means a particular kind of spice or just an open window. Someone in the back shouts, "Don't forget the salt, last time you made it, even the goats wouldn't touch it." The man bows theatrically and moves on to a miracle cure for headaches that upon inspection appears to be equal parts mint tea and loud complaining. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Many of Timbuktu's manuscripts weren't just religious or philosophical treatises. They were handbooks of daily life filled with medical cures, cooking tips, weather predictions, and advice for dealing with everything from toothaches to troublesome neighbors. Some cures were grounded in centuries of observation. Others were, well, let's just say, best left in the past. Historians still argue whether these manuscripts represent genuine scientific curiosity or just a community's best effort to survive the desert with humor and hope. You're handed a sliver of the stew to taste. It's surprisingly good, warm, sweet, and slightly smoky, like the memory of campfires and old jokes. Someone else reads aloud a love charm recipe, mostly poetry, and rose petals prompting giggles from the younger listeners, and a dramatic eye roll from an elder who mutters, "If it worked, we'd all be sultans by now." Another page lists outlandish beauty advice, including a face cream made of goat milk and crushed herbs, and instructions for applying it under a new moon for maximum effect. You suspect results may vary. As the scroll is carefully rolled up and returned to its hiding place, the crowd disperses, swapping stories about long-lost family recipes and miracle cures that never quite worked. You linger chatting with a pair of cooks who claim their grandmother once healed a fever by reading from a manuscript and feeding the patient sweet porridge. Couldn't hurt, one shrugs, and at least they went to bed happy. You realize that in Timbuktu, as in most of history, knowledge isn't always solemn or certain. Sometimes it's hopeful, experimental, and tinged with the flavors of everyday life, a blend of wisdom and whimsy passed down, not just in libraries, but in kitchens, markets, and back alley gatherings like this one. With your belly warmed and your curiosity stoked, you slip back into the city's winding lanes quietly, thankful that some secrets, especially the delicious ones, are never meant to stay hidden for long. You wander on, still savoring the taste of the Sultan's sunrise stew, when a chorus of sneezes greets you at the entrance to another library. Today, it seems as cleaning day, a tradition as old as the city itself, and nearly as dramatic. You watch as a team of determined volunteers, faces half hidden behind colorful scarves, brandish feather dusters, brooms, and for the brave, a slightly damp rag. Each swipe through the air releases a fresh storm of dust motes glittering in the sunbeams that slant through the windows like golden swords. The head librarian, a wiry woman with an expression that could silence even the boldest child, stands guard at a battered desk. She directs the chaos like a general at war, ordering books to be shifted, shelves to be wiped, and manuscripts to be unbundled, inspected, and aired in the sun. Don't sneeze on the geometry treatises, she calls, half joking, half serious. Last time it took us a week to re-alphabetize the star charts. Mainstream historians rarely mention the labor of caring for these ancient collections. But it's this quiet, endless battle against dust, insects, and decay that keeps Timbuktu's treasures alive. The desert is relentless. Its grit seeps into every crack, and it takes a small army of caretakers to stop the slow advance of oblivion. Historians still argue whether it's better to leave fragile manuscripts sealed away or risk handling them for cleaning and study. Either way, you quickly realize that a single sneeze here is considered a minor disaster. You pitch in, brushing dust from a stack of parchment, only to discover a hidden drawer in an old cabinet. With a conspiratorial grin, the librarian helps you slide it open, revealing a bundle of manuscript fragments and a very faded note that reads, "If you're reading this, congratulations, you found the secret recipe for invisible ink pie." Warning: recipe is invisible. The group erupts in laughter, grateful for a little absurdity amid the labor. Among the papers you help sort is a scroll listing foolproof tips for avoiding dust allergies, which unfortunately seems to have accumulated the thickest layer of dust in the room. You joke that maybe the real secret to longevity in Timbuktu is developing an immunity to sneezing, or perhaps learning to read with your eyes half closed and your mouth firmly shut. As the cleaning continues, the team uncovers a stack of letters, old correspondence between scholars filled with both lofty debates and domestic complaints. Your argument about lunar eclipses is invalid, one scribe writes. Also, your cat has been stealing my breakfast. Even here, as history is dusted and catalogued, you see how daily life has always mixed with genius. There's wisdom in these rooms, but also plenty of sneezes, lost pens, and light-hearted grumbling. By late afternoon, the work is nearly done. The library smells less like ancient parchment and more like sunshine and fresh air. The head librarian claps her hands, declares victory over dust at least for today, and rewards the volunteers with sweet mint tea and sticky dates. You sip your tea, marveling at how every task, no matter how mundane, carries with it echoes of all the hands, hearts, and half-suppressed sneezes that came before. You leave the library a little cleaner, a little dustier, and a lot more aware that sometimes the greatest acts of preservation happen not with grand ceremonies, but with laughter, teamwork, and a shared determination to outlast the desert's slow, silent siege. The sun dips low, casting long shadows across the city's rooftops when the wind begins to shift. You catch the first hint of trouble in the air, a faint, sharp tang that prickles your skin and stirs the leaves of the courtyard palms. Old-timers in Timbuktu glance skyward, their expressions growing wary. You realize what's coming: a sandstorm. Not the gentle dust devil kind, but the kind that sweeps in like a living thing, rattling shutters and painting the world in shades of gold and brown. You rush with the others, securing doors and windows, helping to drag battered carpets over delicate manuscripts, anything to keep the worst of the grit at bay. The city's rhythm changes. Chickens are herded into kitchens, water jars brought inside, and children sent running for cover with shrieks of both fear and excitement. It's a kind of blackout sun, blotted out lanterns flickering, everyone hunkering down as the wind begins its low, constant moan. Inside the nearest library, the head librarian leads a practiced routine. Books are bundled in extra cloth shelves, pushed away from drafty walls, and every single page given a final, careful glance. Check the corners, someone shouts. Remember last time? Sand in the indexes for weeks. You laugh, but there's an edge of real concern. In a place where knowledge can be undone by a single careless breeze, no precaution seems too strange. Mainstream historians note that sandstorms have threatened Timbuktu's manuscripts for centuries. Some libraries survived only because their keepers went to ridiculous lengths, burying chests, building double walls, or hiding texts in bread ovens. Historians still argue whether the libraries were designed with sandstorms in mind, or if the city simply learned to adapt through stubbornness and necessity. You find yourself crouched in a corner, wrapped in a faded shawl, feeling the thrum of wind against the thick mud walls. The librarian joins you, offering a tale to pass the time. She tells of a sandstorm so fierce it erased half the street signs and left a camel standing in someone's living room for 3 days. The poor beast learned to appreciate poetry, she jokes. Or at least he stopped eating the manuscripts. Through the flickering lamplight, you watch the dust swirl under the door, each new gust bringing a fine golden mist. You help pile heavy stones against the thresholds and wedge cloth in every crack, marveling at the ingenuity required just to keep words safe for another night. The storm never lasts forever, someone reassures you. But the sand finds a way in always. After what feels like hours, the wind dies down. You step outside, blinking in the weak, honeyed light. The world is strangely quiet, as if the city itself is catching its breath. Everyone emerges, shaking sand from their hair, inspecting the damage. Children chase each other through drifts of dust, and you realize that life and learning goes on even after nature's most determined interruptions. You help sweep sand from the library's threshold, laughing with the others at the strange things the wind left behind: a lost shoe, a page of poetry, and miraculously a perfectly clean, dust-free shelf, as if the storm decided to do its part after all. You promise yourself to remember this knowledge in Timbuktu endures, not because it's untouched by disaster, but because someone is always there to sweep, patch, and laugh in the face of the desert's latest prank. The air is still heavy with the aftertaste of sand as the city stirs back to life. You follow a narrow passageway into a quieter part of the library, where a young student sits hunched over a single battered manuscript. He beckons you closer, whispering, "You have to see this." You settle beside him, peering at the page, and immediately see why it's so captivating. The text is written in a looping, unfamiliar script, lines curling and crossing in ways that look more like art than language. Nobody can read it, the student confides. Not even the oldest scholars. The manuscript, it turns out, is one of Timbuktu's famous unreadable ciphers, a riddle that has confounded generations. Some say it's a code hiding a royal secret. Others, a lost language from a vanished tribe. Still others, a scribe's elaborate prank. Mainstream historians delight in this kind of mystery, endlessly cataloging enigmatic texts in hopes that one day a linguist or lucky child will stumble upon the key. You run your fingers over the page, feeling the gentle ridges where a stylus once pressed parchment. The symbols dance in the candlelight, familiar, yet utterly strange. You ask if anyone has ever claimed to decipher it. "Dozens," the student says, grinning. One old professor said it was a recipe for the world's best stew. Another swore it was a map to hidden gold. My cousin thinks it's a love poem. Historians still argue whether it's even a real language or just someone's experiment gone wild. There's a certain thrill in the not knowing, a delight in the idea that some secrets refuse to be tamed, even by the sharpest minds. You find yourself drawn in, squinting, trying to spot a pattern, a repeated symbol, a hint of grammar, maybe just the echo of a joke across the centuries. The student shares his own theory. "I think it's a bedtime story for those who can't fall asleep until the mystery is solved." You imagine the scribe who first penned this cryptic text, perhaps chuckling to themselves, hoping to baffle the future, or perhaps pouring out their heart in a code only one person would ever understand. You recall tales of other famous ciphers, the Voynich manuscript, the mysterious Rohank Codex, and countless undeciphered scripts that still haunt historians' dreams. Here, in the quiet of Timbuktu, you realize the city's greatest treasure might not be its answers, but its enduring, inviting questions. A group of scholars gathers around, each offering theories with increasing extravagance. One suggests it's instructions for building a flying carpet. Another insists it's a calendar for predicting sandstorms. A third is convinced it's a satire mocking rival scholars disguised so cleverly that only the sharpest wit will ever get the joke. You all laugh, united in your bafflement and the joy of a good puzzle. As the discussion winds down, the student tucks the manuscript back into its cloth sleeve and sighs. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay mysteries. Or maybe the answer will come to someone who's not looking for it. You leave the cipher behind, heart lighter, grateful for a world where not everything can be neatly solved, where sometimes the pleasure is in the pursuit itself. You slip outside into the deepening night, the air cool and fragrant, with the promise of midnight. The city's alleys are mostly quiet now, but you catch the sound of gentle hoofbeats and the low creak of a wooden cart. Following curiosity and the odd hunch, you shadow a figure shuffling along behind a donkey cart, its wheels muffled by sand. The cart looks ordinary enough until you notice it's piled with bundles swaddled in faded cloth and tied with string. There's a nervous energy in the air, as if the darkness itself is holding its breath. You draw closer, trying not to trip over a stray cat or alert the chickens dozing in doorways. The cart's owner, a librarian, by the look of the ink stains and spectacles slipping down his nose, keeps glancing over his shoulder, wary of the few lights still burning in upper windows. He hurries along the twisting lanes, pausing only when a goat strays too near the precious bundles. "Out, out," he whispers. "No nibbles tonight. This is no ordinary book delivery. It's a midnight rescue as urgent as it is secret." Mainstream historians have recorded stories of daring efforts to save Timbuktu's manuscripts from danger, sometimes from invading armies, sometimes from fire, and sometimes from less dramatic but no less persistent threats, like mold and greedy collectors. Historians still argue whether the most famous rescues were organized by learned societies or by quick-witted families acting on their own. Tonight, you're swept into the drama. The librarian waves you over, pressing a finger to his lips before handing you a small knotted bundle. "Carry it like eggs," he whispers, "and don't let the goats see." You nod, and the two of you hurry down an alley, dodging a group of curious neighbors who poke their heads out to investigate the commotion. Someone mutters about midnight madness, but you're too focused on the task to respond. You reach a nondescript house, its courtyard shrouded in shadow. Inside, an older woman lights a candle, revealing shelves already packed with manuscripts disguised as loaves of bread, stacks of pots, and a row of old boots. You grin. No one would think to look for treasures in the boot closet. The rescued bundles are quickly hidden away, and the librarian pours everyone a cup of mint tea, his hands shaking only a little. "There," he says with relief, "safe for another night. At least until the next storm, or the next rumor." You take a sip, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. Someone jokes that a true librarian is half scholar, half spy, and all nerves. The mood lightens as the adrenaline fades and the group begins swapping stories about past rescues, one involving a wheelbarrow, another starring a heroic chicken, and a third in which a stubborn donkey refused to budge until someone read it a poem. You realize that in Timbuktu, saving knowledge is rarely a solitary act. It's a community effort, sometimes frantic, often funny, and always heartfelt. You promise to keep their secrets safe, knowing that tonight you were part of the living history of the city, a small but vital link in the chain of protectors who keep the past alive for another dawn. As you step back into the night, the city feels different, closer, more alive. Every alley and shadow seems to pulse with the heartbeat of shared courage, stubborn hope, and the kind of mischief that has always kept Timbuktu's treasures from slipping away. You slip back into the cool night air, your heart still racing from the midnight mission, when something odd catches your eye. On a quiet street, you notice a stack of bakery loaves set out to cool in the window, but one loaf is unusually square and oddly heavy. You can't help but grin as you remember the whispers from earlier about how Timbuktu's rarest manuscripts were often hidden in plain sight. Curiosity piqued you. Follow your nose to a tiny lamplit bakery, where the owner, an elderly man with flour in his beard and laughter in his eyes, greets you with a conspiratorial wink. "Looking for breakfast or secrets?" he asks, motioning you inside. The place smells like heaven: warm bread, sweet dates, and something else, that familiar musty whiff of old parchment. He gestures toward a shelf lined with ordinary jars, sugar, salt, spices, and tucked between them a battered book with a title nearly rubbed away. "We learned early that a good loaf can fool even the cleverest thief," the baker confides. He lifts the loaf from the window and splits it open, revealing a hollow center lined with pages. The handwriting inside is spidery and beautiful. You realize you're holding a chapter of city history disguised as breakfast. This is more common than you'd expect. Mainstream historians acknowledge that during periods of unrest or threat, Timbuktu's families hid manuscripts wherever they could: jars of grain, boxes of dates under layers of kitchen spice, even sealed behind new walls. Historians still argue whether more books have been lost or saved by such resourceful concealment, but the creativity is legendary. The baker shows you a wall with a faint outline, evidence of a small niche bricked up and plastered over long ago. "My father hid 3 books there when he heard rumors of trouble," he explains. "We found them years later when the wall cracked in the heat. The books survived even if the kitchen paint did not." He laughs, shaking his head. "That was the day we all got a lesson in humility and a lot of cleaning." You help him shelve a new delivery, marveling at how ordinary objects in this city might hold worlds within them. A cracked clay pot rattles when you move it. Inside are scraps of a poem for luck and good harvests, the baker says. Even the row of boots by the door has its secret, a faded treatise on astronomy safely rolled and stuffed in a weathered toe. You're reminded that the genius of Timbuktu was not just in the writing or copying of books, but in the clever communal act of hiding and safeguarding them. Knowledge was not something hoarded but cherished, protected, and sometimes even baked into daily life, just in case a hungry mind or a hungry thief came looking. As you leave the bakery, the baker presses a warm, genuine loaf into your hands. For the road, he says, and if you ever need a hiding place for a good story, you know where to find me. You thank him, heart full of wonder, at the city's humble, hilarious resourcefulness. A city where wisdom is always hiding in plain sight, ready to surprise the next lucky traveler. You walk out into the pale, early sunlight, warm bread in hand, and pause in a dusty square, where travelers are already gathering. Some carry battered satchels, others lead donkeys heavy with bundles, and all of them swap greetings in a half-dozen languages. This is the heart of Timbuktu's living wisdom, not just in the libraries, but in the feet and memories of those who come and go, trading tales for food directions, or just a cool spot of shade. Among the wanderers, you spot a group of scholars seated under a wide-leaved acacia tree. They're travelers too, passing through from distant cities, Fez, Cairo, Kano, or even further. You take a seat beside them, drawn into the loose circle, as easily as you would slide into a favorite old chair. The stories flow thick as the morning tea. One scholar boasts of having memorized every law of inheritance from Andalusia to Gao. Another quietly claims to have borrowed a treatise on desert navigation from a forgetful host in Tripoli, promising to return it next time the stars align. Mainstream history recognizes Timbuktu as a crossroads where not only goods, but ideas traveled back and forth. These itinerant scholars, known as the Wanderers, spread knowledge wherever they roamed, copying, teaching, debating, and sometimes, yes, shamelessly borrowing manuscripts to share elsewhere. Historians still argue whether this circulation of texts diluted their value, or instead created an intellectual ferment that changed West Africa forever. You listen to a bearded traveler from Egypt describe the thrill of seeing the Nile for the first time, and a young woman from the Niger River basin tell of learning astronomy by candlelight under Saharan skies. There's a gentle rivalry among the group, each insisting their hometown makes the best coffee, or recites the longest poems. You realize that for every manuscript that stayed behind in a dusty library, another was carried off stuffed into a pack, or slipped into a sleeve to spark new debates and laughter somewhere else. A merchant joins the group, spreading out a battered cloth covered in odd relics, a compass, a chipped ink pot, a page torn from a lost treatise on efficient sandstorm avoidance. You trade a story for a sip of spicy tea, and watch as the wanderers mark out the routes they'll take once the city's midday heat fades. Some are headed for distant markets, others toward family homes or entirely new horizons. All of them carry pieces of Timbuktu's wisdom, even if only in memory, a borrowed book or a well-worn joke. You realize that the city's greatest gift is not just in the preservation of knowledge, but in its sharing freely, joyfully across boundaries of language, faith, and time. These wandering scholars are like wind over the dunes, erasing old tracks, making new ones, ensuring the story never really ends. As the group disperses, you rise too, carrying with you the gentle chaos and generosity of their morning meeting. Timbuktu's lost libraries are only lost to those who never listen. For everyone else, their echoes ring out wherever a story is retold, a poem recited, or a bit of wisdom tucked into a pocket for the long road ahead. The sun is climbing higher as you drift through the tangled heart of the city, shadows shortening and the day warming around you. Near a great mud brick mosque, you overhear a spirited conversation in French, punctuated by heated hand gestures and wary glances. Curious, you ease closer, picking out words like patrimoine and sauvetage, heritage and rescue. You realize you've stumbled onto one of the city's most controversial stories, the French rescue missions, and the fate of Timbuktu's treasures during colonial times. A small group of locals, elders, and younger scholars sit with a visitor clearly not from here, his accent and polished boots a giveaway. He's recounting how decades ago, teams of French officials swept through cataloging, collecting, sometimes even protecting manuscripts by spiriting them away to museums and libraries far from the desert. For safekeeping, the man insists, though the looks from the locals are complicated, equal parts: gratitude, skepticism, and the sadness of loss. Mainstream historians record the arrival of colonial scholars and collectors who, in the name of preservation, boxed up manuscripts and sent them to Europe or locked them away in vaults. Some texts were genuinely saved from destruction by this process. Others, the city's elders say, were never returned, their pages now silent in foreign archives. Historians still argue whether more harm or good was done, and if the West has any right to claim ownership of Africa's intellectual past. A grandmother in the group quietly speaks up. Books should travel, yes, but a rootless page is always lonely. Her words hang in the air, soft as a sigh. Another scholar points out that when danger threatened, it was often families, not officials, who risked everything to hide or move manuscripts, digging holes in gardens, disguising text as everyday objects, or carrying them on secret journeys through the dunes. The debate swirls on: was the French rescue a theft or a blessing? Or is the truth, as always, caught somewhere in the middle, nuanced, unfinished, impossible to resolve? Someone cracks a joke about the great debate over the world's most boring job archive paperwork, and the group erupts in laughter, the tension easing. Even here, under the weight of history, Timbuktu's people find ways to soften old wounds with humor and gentle reminders that the real value of these books is in their stories told, shared, argued over, never quite settled. You're left reflecting on how every generation, colonizers, scholars, families, has shaped the fate of Timbuktu's libraries, for better or worse. Tonight, the city's wisdom still hums in the air, resilient as ever, proof that while books may wander, their spirit remains rooted wherever people care enough to remember them. You wander away from the debate, weaving through the alleys with thoughts swirling like the ever-present dust. The afternoon light is warm and low, bathing the city in a golden haze, a kind of quiet, gentle magic. Ahead, you spot a group of children seated in a circle beneath a battered awning, their faces intent as an elder unfurls a battered scroll. The mood is different here, hopeful, determined, and tinged with the energy of something being rebuilt from ashes. You realize you've stumbled upon the latest chapter in Timbuktu's saga, the revival, the slow and stubborn work of bringing lost knowledge back to life. The elder is a local hero, one of the so-called manuscript guardians, who risked everything when conflict and unrest threatened to destroy the libraries once again. You listen as she gently instructs the children how to handle the fragile papers, showing them how to repair torn pages with a paste of flour and water, or how to bind cracked covers with strips of cloth cut from old shirts. Mainstream historians now celebrate these modern-day heroes, librarians, teachers, and families, who in recent decades spirited tens of thousands of manuscripts out of danger, sometimes by hiding them under beds, other times by smuggling them out in produce carts and donkey caravans. In many cases, children were entrusted with carrying a single precious book to safety, because who would suspect a dusty school bag or a battered breadbasket of holding the city's oldest treasures? Historians still argue whether enough was saved to call it a miracle, or if too much was lost along the way. You watch the children work, hands sticky with homemade glue, eyes wide with the thrill of touching real history. One boy holds up a page with a crooked grin, announcing, "This one survived the river and the chickens." The elder beams at him, her pride unmistakable. Another child reads a poem aloud, the ancient words echoing over the rooftops and mixing with the cries of distant swallows. There's a hush as the elder produces a phoenix manuscript, one that had been torn, soaked, nearly burned, and somehow pieced back together. The group crowds around, admiring the mended patchwork, each scar a reminder of what was risked and what was saved. Every page here, the elder says, is a little miracle. Some stories can't be erased, no matter how many times the wind tries. You feel hope well up inside you, soft but insistent, as the children vow to pass these skills and secrets to their own children one day. The city's legacy, you realize, isn't just its manuscripts, but the stubborn communal act of remembering, of refusing to let the sands of time sweep everything away. As you leave, the sound of laughter and poetry follows you. In Timbuktu, even the most fragile treasures can be reborn, thanks to those who care enough to piece them back together, word by word, hope by hope. You take one last slow stroll through the hushed corridors and sunlit courtyards of Timbuktu's libraries, the air warm and alive with the hum of centuries. Your footsteps echo on the packed earth, soft as a memory, as you drift past battered doors and stacks of books, lovingly wrapped in linen and hope. The city seems to exhale around you, its golden dust swirling in lazy spirals, as if inviting you to pause and listen to the stories it still keeps hidden in every corner. You linger in a shadowy anteroom where time itself seems to move differently. Here, the only sound is the gentle scrape of a broom and the rustle of pages turned by careful, reverent hands. You spot an old librarian lost in her task, humming the same lullaby you heard on your first night. She glances up and gives a tired, contented smile. Still searching, she asks quietly. You nod, realizing that in Timbuktu, the search is half the journey and half the joy. Outside, a breeze stirs the palm trees and sends a few loose pages skittering across the square. Children dart after them, laughter echoing through the alleys as elders shake their heads with feigned exasperation. You see wisdom passed on in every glance, every joke, every half-finished story murmured beneath the shade of ancient walls. You remember the scholars' debates, the recipes hidden in scrolls, the cat who guards the reading rooms, the sandstorms, the rescues, the rivalry, and the gentle, endless work of cleaning and repairing. In a city that sometimes feels like it exists between waking and dreaming, you realize every day is a quiet act of preservation. Mainstream historians may measure Timbuktu's greatness in manuscripts and maps, but you know the real treasures are woven into daily life: resilience, ingenuity, laughter, and the courage to protect fragile wisdom against all odds. Historians still argue whether the city's story is best told as a legend, a warning, or a bedtime tale for hopeful dreamers. As dusk settles, you sit on a stone step and watch the light fade. The city grows quieter, the air gentle and forgiving. You close your eyes and let yourself drift, content in the knowledge that some stories never really end. They are simply carried forward by those who care enough to remember, retell, and restore. The evening hush grows deep, and as the last rays of sunlight slip away, Timbuktu's endless lullaby settles softly over the city. You let your breath slow, feeling the warmth of the day melt into cool, comforting darkness. With every gentle exhale, you picture the city's treasures safe and quiet, tucked beneath layers of earth linen and loving hands. The walls, thick with history, seem to hold you close, sheltering your thoughts and soothing away the day's last worries. You remember the rhythm of distant drums and the sweet notes of a lullaby drifting from an open window. In your mind's eye, the courtyards glow with lantern light, pages rustling as caretakers make their final rounds. The scent of spiced tea lingers in the air, mingled with the perfume of desert flowers and old parchment. The city is winding down too, laughter giving way to gentle conversation, to soft footsteps, to the whisper of sand outside the door. You feel the stories you've gathered settle around you, each one a gentle reassurance that wisdom can weather the fiercest storms, that kindness lives in every rescued page, and that even the oldest secrets find new voices when shared by moonlight. You sense, too, that you are never truly alone. The guardians of Timbuktu past and present walk beside you, keeping watch as you drift towards sleep. So now let the day slip away. Let the stories of lost libraries, dusty treasures, and determined dreamers become the soft ground beneath your dreams. Trust that the city with all its laughter and wisdom will wait for you, safe, steady, and just mysterious enough to call you back whenever you need comfort, curiosity, or just a place to rest. Good night, traveler. The stories are safe. Sleep well.